The sponsorship for this week's episode has been gifted to the mental health charity Trauma Research UK.
Trauma Research UK are an incredible charity who support those who've suffered or continue to suffer with the effects of trauma and anxiety.
For more information and to access their free online support, go to traumaresearchuk.org.
Having an OCD is like having a voice in your head that taunts you if you don't comply with what it wants. I think that we've all had and we all experience some elements of what is an OCD. I mean, when I say some elements, I think we all experience what we would call intrusive thoughts at times. And I think we also all experience maybe some sort of what we would refer to as superstitions, which is this belief that if I don't do this, then something bad will happen. So, in the most mild extent of this, I've heard many times of people wearing sort of lucky socks or, something that they think will, that's performed well for them in the past. And therefore, if they don't wear it, something bad might happen. I mean, I know for me, one thing that I used to do when I was at Oxford is I would revise in my clothes that I was going to wear leading up to the exam that I was going to wear for the exam, because I thought there was like a superstition in me that if I wore those same clothes, then like I'd remember them better because I was in those clothes.
Am I right in saying that when you did exams at uni, you had to wear the cape thing?
Cape. I remember it's like a superhero. Yes. My cape and mask.
What was it called?
So Oxford have some quite unusual traditions. So we had something called sub-fusk, which is basically our like formal wear. So that would be, you'd either have to wear like a suit or like a blouse and skirt, something like that. And then, yes, you wear the gown, not cape. You wear the gown, which is like the scholar's gown.
Cape.
Yeah, it's the name's a gown, but yeah, it is technically. I mean, I suppose it depends because this is like this. There's always these weird rivalries, isn't there? Like in schools or competitions or pageantries or whatever. And at Oxford, it's no different. But they have the standard gown that you get when you first start, which does look like a cape because it's sleeveless and it's kind of flows behind you. And then if you get a first in your exams, then for the following year you get a scholar's gown. You get made a scholar and you get a scholar's gown, and that's got like puffy sleeves and it's like the whole hog. And that's no longer really capey, that is a proper gown.
Right.
So there's a competition for that.
In the cape at all? Just in general life, when have you ever gone, oh yeah, I need a cape today? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't. And it's kind of funny really, because I got a scholar's gown and it was like such a big deal, and now I'm like, what do I do with it? Like I've got this scholar's gown now and I don't know.
Interesting.
Where does it live now?
It lives in my cupboard, but I have said this before that I would like to be buried in it. I feel like it's like I've earned it, and I want to make the most of it.
But also, what's really interesting, and we'll carry on an OCD in a second, but in your exams every year, you all had to take a flower or a carnation. Every year it was a different colour, wasn't it? Which is so different.
The carnation, you get 3 colours. Yeah. So it's white, pink, and red.
Yeah.
The white one you wear for your first exam of the season every time. The red one you wear for your final exam of the season, and the pink is anything in between.
Wow.
So there was a lot of traditions. I will say one funny thing that happened to me is at the end of exams, we all jump in the river. And I didn't account for the fact that I now had a scholar's gown for my final jump. So every year I jump with this sleeveless light cape, shall we say. Then I didn't think about it. And on my third year, my final year, I jumped into the river in my scholar's gown with sleeves. And yeah, it was very heavy. Didn't weigh that one up very well. Very dangerous. Don't do it.
Could have pulled you down.
Yeah. So luckily I'm a strong swimmer. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But.
So talking of OCD and the fact that, look, why people have OCDs because they believe that if they don't do something, then something bad could happen, or they need to do something for luck, or it's to negate something going wrong, etc. So obviously I get that you would revise in your formal wear to sit the exam. And is that because you believe that was better for you? That it gives you more luck?
I will say there is some science behind that, because there is, very, very early on in the episode, we'll go into Science Corner. There is some evidence that shows that when we learn information and we create memories, we don't just take in the information that we learn, but we take in the surroundings, the settings. And that's why, you can hear a piece of music and it'll take you back to it, a memory, because we take in sounds, we take in everything. So there is evidence that if you take your exam in the same room as you were revising in, technically you'd remember more because you take in information about the setting. I just took that a step further and was like, I'm going to wear the same clothes. So there was an element of science, but I think I took it a bit far, that it then became like a bit of a superstition for me.
There's also evidence that chewing gum whilst revising and then having the same chewing gum whilst you're doing the exam can stimulate the same thing.
Same reason. Yeah. It's called like state dependent forgetting, where we forget because we're not in the same state, or context dependent forgetting.
That's a better retrieval cue, doesn't it? That when you replicate the environment in which you learn something more accurately, it's easier to get it back because it's in this. Yeah.
And that's why, like, often in witnesses in crimes, they take them back to the crime scene to like rejig the memories because of that. Cognitive interview, yes, or mentally imagine them being.
So, Hunter, did you have any little lucky things that you
I
would
did
do?
for my exams? Well, from all my exams, because at school we had to wear suits for my A-levels. I wore the same suit for all my exams, and also I wore my granddad's tie in all my exams as well, just like
our granddad.
Yeah, our granddad.
Yours?
Yeah,
Just your granddad. Yeah.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yes, he is. But yeah, no, that's lovely. I like that though.
Granddad would have loved that. Funnily enough, I would say when you two used to go for your exam, I used to say to your granddad and your nan, "Will one of you go with them? Make sure that they're okay." Did you have any little lucky things? I know you said about that. Was there anything else that you?
Yeah, definitely. My sub fosk was like my wearing that and stuff. But yeah, no, I love that. I remember as well, like someone. Do you remember someone you worked with? Is it a footballer that said they'd always have to wear the same pair of socks when they played a football game? I've never forgotten that. It's interesting though, because there's no evidence that actually helps in any way.
I mean, it's interesting that, and I don't think our brain's always searching for the best possible outcome, and therefore if we get a good outcome, then we're searching for reasons why, and we make these associations. Because so many times I've heard about people going out at weekend and hoping to meet someone, so they'll wear the lucky pants.
Yeah, I've heard that. My copping pants and things like that.
I've never heard that.
Oh yeah,
Oh, so many times. Even lucky shoes.
Yeah, lucky
I
shoes.
honestly feel like this is one person that we know.
No, not at all. I've heard it several times.
I've heard it several times. I'm wearing my lucky underpants, or I'm wearing my lucky knickers, whatever it might be. But I've been told, and I don't believe that I do have an OCD, but some people have said to me that because I have a system that I like to sterilise the kitchen every single day, and I like things really clean and tidy.
I think the word sterilise is a bit of a giveaway there, isn't it? Most people clean the kitchen.
But we do have cats.
It's on a different level.
So for me, every morning before I do anything, after the gym, my first job before I start work, before I do anything, is to clean with antibacterial spray my entire kitchen. But that is only because of the cats. And I do also like smelly things, as in nice smelly things as well. So if we've got guests coming, I'll be honest, I do have this panic where I've got to go, oh, I've got to put my burners on and all my smellies. But it's not because I think something's going to go wrong. It's just that is a standard. And I know a lot of people will say, they'll go around to somebody who cleans and they'll go, oh, you are so OCD. But actually, it's not OCD. We've got to draw a line between an obsessive compulsive disorder where you obsess about something and you feel so bad about it that then you have to carry out a compulsion to sort of silence that voice.
And I think you're right. That's the thing, isn't it? If I don't do this, something bad will happen.
Absolutely.
I think like if you didn't clean the kitchen,
nothing bad would
you'd be
happen.
upset about it because you'd want to get it clean, but you wouldn't worry something bad would happen.
It's just my standard.
It's interesting how standards vary, and some people can say to someone they've got an OCD maybe, whereas other people will go, actually, we've just got high standards. But isn't it funny when you talk about OCD to someone, immediately they go to cleaning?
I know, and that's one of it is common, but it's not the only one. There's numerous, and just to give you a definition of, and this is from the NHS website, a definition of obsessive compulsive disorder is a mental health condition where a person has obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviours. So that's the definition. But cleaning isn't all of them. I
think everyone thinks of like Monica from Friends, don't they? That's your typical kind of cleanliness, cleaning, tidiness, that being what OCD is. And I think that, obviously that character was obviously sort of meant to be funny and overemphasized, but for obviously people that are struggling with it, it's extremely difficult. And a lot of it is not just the physical actions, but a lot of mental things that go on as well, like in their heads having to say things to themselves, count things out. There's a lot of elements of OCD that aren't particularly visual to the outside.
So many different things. I mean, even in recent times, we had someone who also, not only counting, but actually making lists. And they're making lists of the lists and making sure that those lists actually work and doing them continually in the head before they could do anything else.
See, I remember, and again, with OCD, there is this belief that, that OCDs may be something that we're born with. And I don't believe for 1 second that we're born with an OCD. And the reason that I don't believe that is because of the people that we've worked and helped with. And we've always identified some form of trauma, some form of uncertainty in their life that has created that. So one example that springs to mind was a young boy we helped quite a number of years ago, and he had an OCD about checking. So he would check taps, he would check that doors were locked, and his mum was absolutely frantic.
And it actually spiraled from checking once to checking multiple times, and then it spiraled that he would then take photographs. When he'd check things, he'd take photographs. So then when he was at school, he had to check his photographs on his phone to make sure that it was okay. And he got expelled from school because he was using his phone, and he got told not to use his phone, but he couldn't help. He had to look at the photographs.
It was so sad.
And the teacher said, right, well, if you carry on doing that, you're going to go to the headmaster. But he couldn't stop looking at his photos.
You just actually made me think about something. You said to me, have I ever had anything like sort of OCD? And I will say that when I was younger, when we were at school, we were always taught that you have to be careful with paracetamol and that you can't take too much paracetamol. And I got really sort of zoned in on that and was like, right, I've got to be really careful here. If I take paracetamol, I don't take too many. And obviously you can take it every 4 hours. And I would write down times or take a picture on my phone of the exact time, so that then if I panicked and thought, did I definitely take it at 3 o'clock? I could look back at my phone and check the time that it was 3 o'clock. So, and literally look at the picture and go, right, I know I've not taken it, because I was so worried about taking the paracetamol. And even though you wouldn't class that as a traditional OCD, as in it wasn't on anything else, it was just to do with paracetamol, it was that obsessive kind of obsessing about the time, checking the picture, knowing for sure that I'm not taking it.
Trauma being behind it, because you were traumatized at school about the problems with the paracetamol. But going back to this young boy, so he'd had lots of therapy, he'd been expelled from school, and it was a really heartbreaking story. And his mum said to us, look, please, can you help? We have no idea how this started, but this is what's happened. So we saw this young guy.
Just rewinding a little bit, she didn't say, we don't know how it started. She said, can you help? Because an element of her belief was what she'd been told, that potentially it was genetic, and and therefore he'll always have compulsions.
And I just want to sort of like come into that for a second. I know what you're saying is absolutely fantastic, and I just want to really pick up on that, because from a science perspective, I have heard a lot of elements of arguments of biological sort of bases to OCD. But one thing I should just add into that from a science perspective is that no doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist who would even say that there is a genetic element would say that that's the only thing. There is no, even people that would believe that there's has to be some sort of genetic element would say you then need something to trigger that off. It's not just a genetic thing and that's it.
I don't accept.
So even if, and I know you don't accept there is any genetic element, but my point being is, even if you take a psychologist that would say yes, there's a genetic element, they would tell you that there still has to be some life event. It's not enough just to have the genetic.
But there's always, you can always have that argument saying there's some genetic element when one of your parents, for example, had an OCD, and is it copied behaviour or is it genetics? Right? And from our view, it's always copied behaviour, because and I tend to think that if we weren't right, then we've worked with hundreds of people with OCD who've totally overcome their OCD. So if we weren't right, then that could not be the case. And I would thought, if there was one of those professors here right now that said, well, actually, you've got to consider genetics, I would throw it back to them and say, how many people, how was your conclusive proof? Because I can give you conclusive proof that we've got people over it.
But even if there was a genetic element, they're still saying that there has to be a trauma on top.
And the truth, isn't it, that you can, if you're looking for a similar gene, then you'll always find it, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with OCD. You'll find it. So just going back to this point, because what I really want our listeners to appreciate is our experience of what that start was in the people that we've helped, how we help them to overcome it, and so that whoever's listening to our podcast right now can actually either use that for themselves or to people that they love.
And that's why I'm saying as well, that even if they believe that there is a genetic element, they need to know they can still get through it, because dealing with whatever's on top takes it away anyway.
Correct. So this young man, we asked his mum, did she know where it might have started? She thought it was genetic, and when we said we don't believe that, she said, I have no clue. We sat and we spoke to him, and the fact that he wanted to check meant to us, for some reason, he was on high alert that he had to check and there had to be a consequence. So we just asked him the question, When were you ever left in charge of having to look after the house or do something and it was your sole responsibility and it all went wrong? And it was like a eureka moment. And he said, oh my goodness, I remember he'd basically been left to lock the house up before going to school. He'd washed his hands, he'd left a piece of soap in the sink and it had gone in the plug hole. And he'd left the tap, not running, but it was on, not fast, but it was running. Anyway, cut a long story short, the sink overflowed. It went onto the floor, came through the ceiling, and he got into massive trouble off his parents because he'd not switched the tap off and the soap had been left in the sink. Therefore, from that moment on, he has this, oh goodness, if I'm left responsible for something, then I might get it wrong and I'm going to get into trouble. And obviously you don't think about that. It just kind of, you create this schema, this behavioural reference. And so moving forward, is everybody would go out to work in the morning. He would be the last one to leave the house. And so consequently, he did have to take photographs of everything because he simply lost trust in himself due to an earlier event. Just knowing that and helping him realise that it was a one-off, that, it wasn't done with intent, that it didn't represent him or his life. He literally let it go that day, didn't he?
Yeah, and knowing that, but also what actually caused the problem that day was being shouted at by his dad, not what happened. And his dad didn't shout at him because he was really having a go at him. He was just shouting at him because he was shocked to come home and to find out that there was water dripping from the ceiling, and it was caused by this soap being left in the sink and the tap dripping. And so just like, but he was in trouble in the moment, and the dad probably overreacted a bit, but then it was forgotten. But he didn't forget it, and therefore he took on that responsibility.
Yeah, and then I know that symmetry is another thing, and I think another person that spoke out about that is David Beckham. And David Beckham, actually in The Independent, his words were, I've got this obsessive compulsive disorder where I have to have everything in a straight line or everything has to be in pairs. And again, when we've come across that, the origin of that has most often been where from a childhood that has lacked organisation, and where it's felt very erratic, or that organisation was deemed to be a good thing, like you got rewarded for it. And so obviously I don't know David Beckham's backstory, but quite often this symmetry thing, this need for perfection, is because, like I say, either you've had some sort of an erratic upbringing, or because you've got into trouble for, being untidy, or you believe you've been rewarded for doing things.
But
right.
again, with symmetry, I could say part of that standards. If you've got, because I read somewhere about David Beckham, and he was saying about having tins in a cupboard, and he always wanted the label facing out. But surely from an ease, if you can see the labels, you know what you're getting, as opposed to looking through all the tins in your cupboard.
I suppose again it comes down to that. Is it obsessional? And what I mean by that is it just that I want it that way? Or is it, if I don't do that, I actually start getting anxious that I think something bad's going to happen? And that's the distinction, isn't it?
Let's say there were 6 tins there and one was slightly off, but you could still see the label. Would he have to go and put it straight?
Yeah. And if he didn't, would he think about it again, or would he just go, oh, I wish I could do that, and then leave it and not forget, not think about it again? I suppose that's the distinction, isn't it? When it becomes obsessive versus it's just something that you prefer, which
but
is
having
fine.
them facing forward, to me, seems like common sense.
Yeah, no, I take that.
And I'm not got an issue with that.
That said, I just chuck tins in the cupboard. They just go in, don't they, Hunter?
Slam, man.
Yeah.
Slam.
Slam it, shut the door.
Yeah, just to get them. Yeah. I mean, I do have a bit of order.
Can I just say,
all the tomatoes go together and the tuna, that kind of thing.
But when we pull the tins out, they've all got dents in because they've just been slammed.
And also, Hunter's very good at just throwing things in, and then the next person that goes into the cupboard after Hunter opens the cupboard and everything falls on the floor because he's just like
that's
jammed
not a
in.
problem with the tin cupboard, but other things is, I'm just like, if I'm in a rush, I'm just like, I'll just shove it in there. As long as the door shuts, I'm fine with it.
Do you remember?
It looks all right on the surface.
Do you remember when we were kids and we were trying to get something, and I can't, it's just coming back to me now, we were trying to get something in a cupboard, and I said to you, we need to get this in the cupboard, and we managed, you were like throwing something in the cupboard and you slammed it shut and you went, don't open that cupboard now. And you were like, just don't open it. So we didn't tell anyone, we just left. I can't remember what it was now, but we knew that one of you two would open it next.
So he kept sliding out, so I threw it in and shut the door quickly so it wouldn't fall out.
And then he went, just don't open that cupboard. And I was like, what about the next person that opens it? And he went, that's not my problem. And left.
Thanks, that's good to know.
It's so interesting what we find out on this podcast, because that's happened to me so many times when I've opened cupboards. I never knew who the culprit was.
I mean, it could have just been a first time thing. that it happened
it's
like
happened
that.
to me many times.
Yeah, but it could
and
have
I
just been,
thought some things just moved.
That's what I mean. Something could have just
The next
moved. Or
time
Now we
there's an
know.
avalanche
Well,
that
not
falls
really.
on my head when I open a cupboard, I know it's one of you two that's
All
behind
alleged.
it. Yeah.
To be fair, the only time it's ever bothered me that is once I had a really nice dairy-free yogurt in the fridge and I opened it and it fell on the floor and I lost my yogurt. That was very sad. But to be fair, I don't think that was you.
No.
He doesn't do it in the fridge, it's more in the cupboard, so.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to OCD, I think the most unusual OCD that we've ever come across, and it must be quite a few years ago now, was a lady called Ashley. Do you remember that? And we met Ashley. She came on our TV show that we did, the Speakmans, quite some years ago, and she had an obsessive compulsive disorder that orientated around biting. In fact, I think we've got a little clip now of what she said to us back then.
Just see objects and I'll be kind of like, I just need to bite it. For instance, the door handle, and I just bite it. It's absolutely insane. It's just getting ridiculous and it's gradually getting worse, and I just wonder what I'm going to do next. I wonder what I'm going to bite next. I already bite my hands, my phone, I bite batteries. When I turn my straighteners off, I bite them. Dog balls is absolutely disgusting, but I cannot help it. I know it's disgusting, but I cannot stop myself from doing it. It's just getting out of control.
Keeping up with her daily rituals has completely taken over Ashley's life. Her mum Diane remembers when her daughter's behaviour started to change.
From the age of 8, she would check things, double check things. Everything was in place for school. Her clothes were in the drawers, neat, tidy.
I just think I'm chucking my life away.
I didn't realise, I'd forgotten that it actually started. Her mum said she had behaviours earlier
From
on,
the
didn't
age of
she?
8, yeah. I think that, it's a really good point that, because again, that's why a lot of people go to, it must be genetic, because it starts at such a young age. And I think as well, if you don't know what you're looking for, as in, we see all the time people with OCD and we sort of see these common installations of these things, and I think if you don't have that intel, then often it can feel like, well, it just doesn't make any sense. And obviously we now know where Ashley's came from. Obviously at that point in that video we've just seen there, she didn't know. And I think that because we have this awareness, we can identify it. But for many people, and probably people listening, if they've got OCD, they can just feel, well, it doesn't make any sense. For Ashley's mum, for Ashley, it didn't make sense. Yes, they knew it started at the age of 8, but they had no idea why, just that she liked things to be neat. So if you've got, on the face of it, an 8-year-old that likes things to be neat and is organising their school uniform and making things very straight, you would go, oh, it must be genetic, because it doesn't make any sense, right? No one in the family, well, I'll say genetic, no one in the family had it or whatever, but it doesn't make any sense. Where could it have come from? But unless you know what you're looking for, then it's hard to identify where it began.
What's really interesting about that episode is that I remember sitting down with Ashley and asking her when it started. I didn't know, because they'd interviewed her mum separately, and her mum said that we didn't know when it started. And actually, Ashley didn't know when it started. So if you're struggling with OCD, it might be worth asking your parents and maybe people around you, when did you ever notice me start this behaviour? Because Ashley didn't know when it started.
But what we did with Ashley, and again, this is anybody who has any issue, whether it's OCD, PTSD, phobias, whatever it might be, the first question is, when were you first aware of it? And then what happened just before then? Yeah. And that's exactly what happened with Ashley. And knowing that OCD is something that is often created for a feeling of certainty, a feeling of control. The question is, what was going on in your life where you had disharmony, where you had no certainty, where you felt out of control?
And also, because the compulsive behaviours is to stop bad things from happening, what did you perceive as being a bad thing that was happening right then when you created it?
Yeah. So with Ashley, obviously, we discovered that the turbulence in her life that created this need for certainty was that her parents arguing. And, her parents were arguing, and she started the behaviour then to give her a form of good luck, a form of certainty, help her parents, please stop arguing. And children believe in magic. And it just so happened she was performing one of her sort of OCD behaviours, and because the doorbell rang or somebody happened to call around, whatever happened, they suddenly stopped. She has the belief in that moment as a kid, oh my goodness,
I've stopped
this
it.
OCD works.
Yeah.
And so therefore then you don't want to take it to chance. So you carry on through life. And I mean, she got to a point where she was biting things like for like 10 plus hours per day. It was consuming her life. And yeah, you know, we sat with her for the day and we helped her to overcome it.
You make a really good point, which is the fact that it was her parents arguing, which as an adult, you wouldn't really see as being a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, which is why often people don't understand where their problems come from. And that goes for anything. You know, you can look at that and go, well, your parents arguing, so what? It doesn't seem that big as an adult, but as a child, that would have been mortifying. Like, you know, what if they split up? What if something bad happens? What if, you know, you don't like disharmony and it doesn't make sense. And as a child, you can't stop it because you're not old enough to kind of get involved and have the conversation and say, right, come on, let's calm down, let's stop, you know. So I think that that's something just for people to really consider, is not only what was going on at the time, but how did that feel as a child? How did that feel to a child? And I've said that before on this podcast about other things, you know, because often where we go wrong as adults and when we go to therapy is we look for things that seem like major traumas that would affect you now and not for what affects children. And that's the thing, if you set something up in childhood, it's what was upsetting to her as an 8-year-old. And I think that's just so important for people to consider. And then, you know, another thing I was just going to say as well is that you said that it got sort of progressively worse, and the reason why these things get progressively worse, because she might do a ritual and then on this one occasion it doesn't work, so then she does it 2 times and then 3 times and 4 times, and that's why it builds and they get bigger and bigger, because ultimately they don't work. But you have to do more and more to try and appease yourself that that's enough, and this time you've done enough to make sure the bad thing doesn't occur.
The absolute worst possible thing, if your parents are still together, of course, that is your parents splitting up. And you might look back as an adult and think, yeah, I knew they were going to split up eventually, it's not a big deal, but it's how it felt then.
Yeah,
and your parents splitting up as a child is terrifying.
And even your parents, when they actually do split up, it can be fine for children, but the point is that the fear of change and the uncertainty, isn't it, that can be so awful. So more the anticipation of it rather than it actually happening, really.
So let's have a listen to the latest recording that Ashley sent over to us of how she's doing now.
I suffered for 18 years, and that was until I got help from the lovely Speakmans, which was about almost 6.5 years ago now. And that was a moment that changed my life. And I have not done a single OCD ritual or anything related to OCD since, nothing. And since then, 6 years on, I'm extremely happy. I went on to have an amazing little boy, Hugo, who is now 3. And just a huge, huge thank you to Nick and Eva, who changed my life so much for the better. Thanks, guys.
I remember with Ashley, when we worked with her all those years ago, we got so slated on social media where you can't help OCD, that won't last.
It was interesting, a lot of, surprisingly, and several OCD charities.
Particularly one was very vocal and very defamatory of our work and what we were.
And saying, watching the episode, and again, you know, it's very easy to watch a 46-minute episode and that's been edited down from a full day and criticise it, but ultimately, as we just heard from Ashley, she has done no OCD behaviour since, and which is what we knew would be the case because we dealt with the cause instead of the symptoms, you know. And it's sad that people who are in forums, people who are helping people with OCD, are taking away that hope. We got criticised for giving false hope. Well, for me, hope is hope, and if you take hope away, then what have you got left?
Yeah, I think taking hope away from anybody is cruel, and it really, you know, it does make me very cross that this person, it was one particular one that I recall at the time, and saying, you know, that, oh, you can't do this, and you're giving people, you know, how despicable to take hope away from anybody that they can get better.
I mean, the thing is, people are overcoming OCD all the time, and it's not just with you, it's on the whole, people overcome OCD, and it's just getting the right help. But if you tell people that they can't overcome OCD, then they're going to stop looking for help, and they're going to not get the help they need, and they're not going to get better. So it's so important. And I think that, you know, Ashley's story there, to go from the point where I know she mentioned in that first video we played that she was even biting her hair straighteners, and she'd, you know, burn all her mouth.
Yeah, she'd bit bags with it. She'd take the dog for a walk, collect the dog poo in the bag, and would bite the dog poo bag. I mean, that's how severe this was. She knew it was wrong. She didn't want to do that.
Absolutely. And that's the point. You know, you have to be in a desperate situation to be burning your own mouth, knowing that you don't want to do that, but you feel you have to do that. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen. And if Ashley can be in that state and can get better, then anybody can get better. And I think the big, as she said, the big key thing, turning point for her was realising where it started. But the big thing was when we said, so you did this to stop things bad from happening. Did anything else bad happen in your life? And then she said that her mum had breast cancer. And then that the question about, well, you know, did you bite around a bed and tell them not to give her chemo? And she was like, no, of course not. And why aren't the NHS using your services if what you do work? And it was just it was just us saying the right words, because obviously everybody's different and everybody needs different evidence. But, you know, how do you get over an OCD? You locate where it started. How did you perceive that? What do you perceive the OCD gives you? And then challenge it until you back that OCD into a corner, that it can no longer have a voice, that even when it tries to have a voice, you go, do you know what you're telling me is not true. And my favourite analogy of an OCD, having an OCD is like being in a relationship with an abusive partner, because, you know, this OCD tells you, oh, you know, but I'm doing this because I care. But then it's hurting you by making your life so difficult. It's trying to control you. It tells you something that's not true. And that, you know, if you're in a coercive, abusive relationship, it's the same sort of thing. You're told that you're being loved, but yet you're being hurt. You're told that this is the best for you, but actually no, it's the best for that person. You know, they tell you that, you know, they care about you, but they're trying to take away your freedom by keeping you away from your family and friends, etc. It's the same with an OCD. And I think when we can actually start to see that, hang on a second, I am being controlled here, because, you know, a lot of people say, yeah, but, you know, I need to do this. It gives me a sense of control. But when you actually realise that, no, that's the lie that the OCD has been telling you, you can start to face up to it and start going, no, you know, this isn't true what you're telling me, and you're not actually helping me. You're hindering my life and my happiness. I think that's the irony, isn't it? Because people start an OCD because they feel out of control and they need control, but yet when they have an OCD, they're so out of control. And I think that's the irony of it, because I know someone that I work with who had OCD. Her OCD actually came from a very sort of controlling upbringing, where, to be fair, her parents weren't controlling in the way that they were trying to be nasty, but they were just very, very strict, to the point where it edged on being controlling. And as a result of that, she felt that she could never make any decisions, she could never do what she wanted to do. And obviously they loved her, but their parenting was too controlling. And as a result, she set up this OCD of, she wanted to have something that was hers and something that she could control that wasn't under her parental control. And obviously we helped to, when I spoke to her, we helped to sort of shift that so that she realised actually now she's an adult and she is in control. But again, it comes from trying to establish some control. But yet, like I said to her, she was actually so out of control because of the OCD. That was the one element of her life that she couldn't control.
It's helplessness as well, isn't it? I know that, you know, for a lot of people we've helped, particularly when it's OCDs, even around sort of hair pulling or skin
trichotillomania,
dermatillomania, which I think we definitely need to do another episode on in the future. But it is that feeling of being out of control, because a lot of OCD start because of parental arguments, because of being in you know, your parents maybe being very strict. Another one is being bullied at school, and I know that even as a kid, when you're a kid and you don't feel you've got control. I know that when my parents argued, and, you know, I felt I had, you know, I would ask them not to argue. I would plead, and if they carried on, and I felt that all my control was gone, and then I'd be, well, what else can I do? And I would ask for magic to happen. Literally, I remember as a kid, numerous times, I was brought up a Catholic, numerous times being in my bedroom, falling to my knees with my rosary beads and doing a full rosary over and over and over again while all the argument was happening. And the reason that I did that was because I had nowhere else to turn. And I think that that's what an OCD behaviour comes from.
That's interesting though, because you turn to the church and to praying, so it sort of didn't carry on as a bad thing. Whereas an OCD, and as we know, most of them are created in childhood, and they're created. And I'd like everyone to consider it. It's no different to having created an imaginary friend. And you create an imaginary friend to share things with, but good things. And then you get to a point in your life where you let that friend go because you realise it's something that you created that was imaginary. And I want you to say, if you're struggling with OCD, I want you to consider that same process with the OCD. It's something that you created to try and get some control in your life when you felt out of control, but that no longer applies, right? That was when you were a child. You're now an adult, potentially. And so does that still apply? And you'll find out it won't. And then creating a compulsions versus facts list. All your compulsions, write them down, and then look at the facts. Do those compulsions actually do anything in your life? And you'll find that none of them do.
Yeah. I suppose what you're saying there is you create it in a time of need, but then never turn it off.
Yes,
correct? So
that's
it's
exactly what it is.
It's there when you need it, and you can. So in Ashley's case, she created it in a time of need because she didn't want her parents to split up. But now she's an adult, and she no longer needs to do things to stop her parents splitting up.
Yeah, because logically, you would look back and go, okay, I created it to stop my parents splitting up, but as soon as they split up, I should stop it.
Yeah, because they did.
But
That was the irony. They had split up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really helpful for people, is just to identify, you know, as we've said, go back to when did this start? When did these behaviours begin? Because sometimes as well, I should say that OCD behaviours can adapt and evolve and change. So with Ashley, she started off with being neat on things, and it became sort of biting. And like I said, these things move. So people might be looking back at the start of a specific behaviour, and actually what they need to look back at is the start of it all. When did you feel that you needed to create something to create some control in your life? Why? Does that situation still apply? If it does, which is very, very rare, is what you're doing actually helping to resolve that situation? Because as a child, you might think it is, but as an adult, you can look back at it and go, actually, it isn't.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I just want to add, I mean, obviously there's OCDs can be varied. You know, we've sort of mentioned from check-in, hand washing, counting, even numbers, odd numbers, symmetry, things facing forward. We've mentioned about biting with Ashley. Also, you can have sort of having to repeat things under your breath. But then there's also a sort of a compulsive, like irrational thoughts. And a lot of people say that to us, I have these irrational thoughts. And that is referred to as pure O, because there's the obsessive thinking, but there is no compulsion that tends to follow with it, and that can be quite disturbing for the person as well. But there's always something behind it, and if you've had a turbulent childhood, you've got to work, write yourself a timeline and go and see a therapist and work through that turbulence and work through those events, because actually what you might find is that you go looking at resolving those issues from the past, and then suddenly you'll notice that the OCD behaviour, even though you've not discussed it, will start to diminish because you've actually addressed the origin of it inadvertently.
I also think it's important to put into perspective that if you have been diagnosed or you feel that you're getting intrusive thoughts, that actually we have thoughts, right? We have thoughts. We have good thoughts and bad thoughts. Don't give it another label, because if you give it a label of intrusive thoughts, you're creating an identity for something that you feel out of control with. Whereas you set those thoughts up in the first place, and those thoughts were to stop bad things from happening, and they've just spiraled out of control. But you have good thoughts and bad thoughts. And listen, that's all it is. And actually, if we look at our thoughts in general for anyone, we will have more bad thoughts than good thoughts, because our brain is slanted towards protecting us, and because of that it looks for danger, and therefore we have more bad thoughts than we have good thoughts. And a way of balancing that up, and I'm sure we're going to
we're going to come to that now.
But I'd just like to say it whilst I'm on there, a way of balancing that up so you get more good thoughts is for looking at things that you're grateful for, because that will balance that out.
So, does anyone have anything to add before we start putting our little tips into our handbook to happiness on the OCD page today?
I just wanted to carry on with what you were saying about intrusive thoughts there, because I did a lot of reading about intrusive thoughts actually before we did this podcast, and was reading quite a few science articles about intrusive thoughts, and you said something there which was that, not to label them intrusive thoughts and to accept we have good and bad thoughts. But interestingly, we all have intrusive thoughts. So reading up on this, that we do all have thoughts that will randomly enter our mind and might seem like they come from nowhere, because our brain is processing so many things any given moment, and so we do have thoughts that might randomly just pop into our heads, and they are intrusive thoughts, and they can be positive, they can be negative. As you said, they usually are negative, just because our brain's constantly evaluating for potential dangers, things that could go wrong, to try and keep us safe. But one tip that I would like to give people if they do struggle with intrusive thoughts, I mean, obviously dealing with the source and dealing with where this began and the start and the problem that created all this is the key, but there's also things we can do to help in the moment. And one thing that is really interesting is research shows that if we identify a thought and we think about it more, that actually that creates more anxiety around it. It makes it a bigger problem. We start to think about it even more so. So by identifying it and going, oh my God, that's an intrusive thought, that's really problematic, we create more anxiety. It will make the OCD worse. It makes the thought repeat more often because we're telling our brain it's important, and we're actually committing a lot of brain energy and resources to that thought. And a good tip that if anyone meditates, that they tell you meditation is if a thought comes into your mind, because often when we meditate that happens, is just to accept it and acknowledge it and then move on. And by doing that, and the same applies here, if you have an intrusive thought, just accept it and go, yeah, that's a thought that I've had, and carry on. It no longer gives it the weight. So what that does, it reduces the anxiety because we're not making it an anxious thought, and also it relieves the obsession as much because we're not now obsessing over it and making it a big deal. So just one of the best things that researchers identified that we can do with intrusive thoughts is just to accept them, acknowledge them, and move on from them.
But I'd like to come back to that because I don't like the word intrusive, but I could say that all thoughts are potentially intrusive because we're getting triggered by our environment. So we can get intrusive great thoughts. We can listen to a piece of music which will give us a thought which will take us back to a place in time where we had the best time ever, right? And that's intrusive because we weren't looking for that thought.
I think
it intruded in our mind.
No,
right?
sure.
So,
yeah.
So just consider the word intrusive means that something's coming into our mind that we didn't expect, but it happens good and bad. So I'd still go back to, we have good and bad thoughts.
No, totally. But I think what you're pointing out there as well is something we've spoke about before on this podcast about confirmation bias, and that if we look for things, we'll find them. And I think that, we have to accept we all have intrusive thoughts. We have to accept that, some of those are good, some of those are bad, and just to acknowledge them and move on from them. But the other thing as well is to acknowledge that if we do have OCD, and if we label that we have intrusive thoughts, we're going to be looking out for those thoughts even more and feeling more out of control and anxious with them. Whereas if we don't have that label, then they're not going to be as big of a deal. Agreed. And the bigger deal you make it, the worse you will feel inside.
Well, I personally don't like the word, but when anyone says to me about intrusive thoughts, it's always talking about negative stuff. But just consider you have intrusive positive thoughts as well.
Yeah, that's true. So any more tips for our handbook tappiness? Hunter, do you have any?
I was going to ask, at what point does nail biting, skin picking, hair pulling, all that kind of thing become obsessive? Is it always obsessive? Is it not? Is it sometimes just a bad habit? I think
it can be a bad habit. And we will definitely talk about this, I think, again, and sort of
that's an episode
together.
on its own, definitely.
But yeah, I think the nail biting can become habitual. And it can start as a bit of a stress reliever. But same with the skin picking and hair pulling, actually. There is always, trichotillomania, which is when you pull your hair, dermatillomania, which is when you pick your skin. There is still, we've always found there's been an origin. There's always been something behind it. So it does start as a behaviour because of, and then it becomes habitual and a go-to. So, if I'm upset, then it's a go-to. I pull my hair.
It's like smoking, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I guess so. It really is. So
could it become obsessive as well, if that's the behaviour that
obsessive? So you obsess about it, so you think about it a lot. I think
anything can become obsessive if there is a perceived positive benefit.
Yeah. Do you not think though that the difference between something that is, because an addiction's obsessive, right?
Yeah.
So there's a fine line here between an addiction and an OCD, because both have that obsessive element, right? So if you're addicted to smoking, you're constantly thinking about wanting to go for a cigarette, and if you're addicted to alcohol, then you'll want to keep drinking, etc. But do you not think the difference is with the obsessive compulsive disorder? If I don't do this, something bad will happen. Because I think that's the distinction. I think like nail biting, for example, is very, and same with skin picking and hair pulling, is very addictive for the people that do it, but they don't have that, if I don't do this, something bad will happen. And I think that's the distinction between the OCD.
It's a compulsion, definitely, that they feel a compulsion to do the act, but there isn't a bad...
Because I don't think anyone who, say, has like a obsessive nail biting would say, if I don't bite my nails, something bad's going to happen. They just feel the urge to do it. And I think that's the difference, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I would say anyway, that's the difference. They're very, very similar. They're both addictive sort of behaviours.
So that's definitely a future episode: dermatillomania, trichotillomania, nail biting, and also we need to do an episode on superstition, because superstition and OCD is so similar, but that's another topic for another day. So do either of you guys have something to add to our handbook to happiness, Liv? We've sort of talked about a lot there.
Yeah, we have spoke about a lot of things there, and I think the bottom line is that if you suffer with an OCD, identifying when did it start, because there is no one out there that would tell you, well, they shouldn't tell you that there is any element of this that is purely genetic. I know there's a lot of genetic arguments when it comes to people looking at the reasons for OCD, but even people that accept those arguments would tell you there has to be something else, and therefore dealing with that, the OCD should no longer be an issue. So absolutely, there is always something that starts this off, and it's finding what that is, dealing with that, and once you've dealt with that, the OCD falls away. So writing a timeline, as we've said, looking back at what age did you start to show these behaviours, maybe asking parents and figuring out what was going on in your life at that time, remembering that it was what is traumatic to a child or upsetting to you at that age, and not what now looks traumatic, and asking yourself, when did you feel out of control? What led you to feel a need to create some control in your life? So that would be the absolute best thing, and then you can go to a therapist with the right thing and say, this is my issue, this is when it started, and they can help you with the exact right thing, rather than dealing with just the symptoms of OCD, which I think a lot of therapists do if they don't know the exact cause.
Yeah. Nick, do you have anything?
I would just like to remind anyone that if you're struggling with OCD, you don't lose sight of the fact that you're the one that created it, and you are the one that can stop it. And, that in-between bit is a bit of a journey. And when you start questioning, why did you start it, then it gives you the answers, and you are the one who can just make a decision to stop doing it. But I would like to, we've not done a joke for a while, and whilst OCD is, obviously a serious subject, I'd like to give people a bit of a giggle, because there are out there a lot of bands, a lot of cover bands, basically, and one of my favourite bands, I've got a cover band, and the difference with this band though is they've always got the same song set, they always start at the same time, and they always finish at the same time, and they will always play the songs in the same order. They're called OCDC.
Oh dear.
Thank you.
I mean, the one thing I'll give him on that one is that it was on topic.
And of all of them, it wasn't that bad.
No, but it was
funny.
And I love ACDC.
But it was on topic, like we've had very random jokes on this podcast, and I feel like that one was at least
felt less shoehorned.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Like when he goes, so have you ever thought about whales? And we go, yeah, okay, this is obviously a joke, isn't it? Because we haven't thought about whales. We've been talking about, phobias, and you randomly talk about whales, whereas when we talk about OCD and he makes an OCD joke, I'll give him some credit for that.
Yeah. One thing that I read, this is off topic now, but seeing as you brought that up, we were talking about whales.
Oh, God.
I read over the weekend that actually, because, I read a lot about bowels, that 4 out of 5 people actually suffer with diarrhea, which led me to think, does that mean one person enjoys it?
Anyway, on that note,
we should just not make any conversation around the jokes, because it encourages more.
Let's not look at him. Let's just look away. And then, however, my sort of final tips, I guess, for the handbook to happiness are if you have an OCD behaviour, and work back, when did you become aware of it, and make sure it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same OCD. It might have been something else, and then you defaulted. And so, when did it start? When did you become aware of it? What was it? What was the inner dialogue? What was it that you were trying to achieve when you first started OCD behaviour? There will have been a positive intent. What could that positive intent have been? Understanding that, you can then satisfy it. I think understanding that inner voice and what it says, what you've got to do is you've got to give it that much evidence to prove, get it back up in a corner that what it's telling you is actually not true. I think that is really important. We talked about intrusive thoughts earlier, knowing that we do have intrusive thoughts, both good and bad. If you have bad intrusive thoughts, negative ones, already decide of something that you're going to think about, that you're going to default to into every single detail. That might have been a birthday party, that might have been a holiday, a specific event on holiday, but really go into that memory and really think about every single element, because what you're doing by that is that you're silencing that negative intrusive thought process, and you're overriding it with something that's better, more positive for you. Do have therapy if you're struggling. Do, like Nick said, this is a journey. You can't expect to have had habitual behaviour for many, many years and then just, some people like Ashley, she got the right message and she was there and then made the decision. I realise I made a mistake. I realise this isn't doing anything for me. And hopefully you can get there too. But if you can't, it is a journey. But you weren't born with it. And you can definitely overcome it. And there is always, always hope. We hope that today's episode has been interesting, whether you do or don't have an OCD. And if you do, then please do share this podcast with people who might be struggling, that they might find this helpful and useful. And just please know that no matter what you're struggling with, you can always get better. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for joining us. Wherever you're listening to this podcast today, do be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and we'd be incredibly grateful of a 5-star review.
Oh, and don't forget to recommend our podcast to your family and friends.
And if you'd like to have a look at some more free resources, take a look at our website, nickandeva.com.
If you want to drop us a question, we'd love to hear from you. Send it to admin@speakman.tv.
And you can follow us. We're at The Speakmans on all social media platforms. On YouTube, we're Handbook to Happiness Pod. If you are struggling, do be sure to speak to your general practitioner. And all that's left to say is that we appreciate you spending time with us today.